Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AI Agents Hackathon live streams.
The AI Agents Hackathon is a free virtual hackathon running from April 8th to April 30th.
We're hosting over 20 live streams where you'll learn how to build agents using various Microsoft technologies. At the end of the 3 weeks, submit your project for a chance to win fantastic prizes.
And now over to our friends at Reactor.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the AI Agent Hack. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to review our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenters to answer live. Our session is recorded. It will be available to view on demand within 24 to 48 hours. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our speakers for today. Thanks for joining.
In Australia, if you're wondering about the accent, I'm what's known as a cloud developer advocate, and I'm in our AI team, and my role is obviously around AI and connecting with folk. My LinkedIn ID down there is glove boxes on LinkedIn, and you can also head off to my GitHub for glove boxes as well, and absolutely feel free to connect with me, and if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. Okay, so this session here is about build AI agents in Azure, and we're going to be talking about a service called the Azure AI Agent Service. This service is still in preview. We'll be coming out of preview reasonably soon, and the goal of this service is to make it considerably easier to go and build agent-style applications. I've been around Microsoft around about 30 odd years, and what I have to say, what I'm seeing today with the power of these large language models and building applications and just kind of thinking of different ways to build applications is really just astonishing with the kind of things you can do really with so little code involved. Okay, so the resources. You might want to take a screenshot of this. That QR code actually points off to a workshop. And the workshop that I'm not going to be explicitly going through the workshop today, but the demo is based on the workshop. And the workshop will get you a long way down the path of understanding what's going on. You'll find that as you're building agents and thinking about that, the skills you really need to start thinking about is particularly around things like prompt engineering and setting up clear instructions. That's probably where I spend most of my time, is really around guiding the large language model to do what you want. And you'll find a lot of examples in there of instructions that I'm using to guide the large language models to make this application work. So you'll find the link to the docs and the link to the repo. So do pop a screenshot. Okay, so in terms of the use case for this talk, so you might have heard of a company that we have called Contoso. It's a fictitious company. It's a brand that we use for demos. And the scenario for this one is that Contoso is an e-commerce site, and they sell camping and outdoor equipment. And what we're trying to do is set up a sales or data analysis for sales data for the sales staff at Contoso. So it's kind of like a back office solution using an agent to do this. Now, you've probably already thought about agents, and maybe you've even done some work with agents. There are a lot of frameworks out there, from things like Chainlit and a whole range of semantic kernel, AutoGen, a whole lot of range of agent frameworks out there. I'm going to be talking mostly about something called the Azure AI Foundation SDK. But on that path, what you've already done to date, you've almost certainly thought about what an agent is, or you've dug around and tried to find out a definition of an agent. And this is a version. It's not necessarily the definitive version, but it's a version that we're kind of happy with. So what have we got? We've got an agent is a semi-autonomous piece of software that can be driven by a goal and will work to achieve that goal without knowing in advance exactly how it's going to happen to do that or what steps it's going to take. Now, when I read that, it still doesn't entirely clear. So to give you a bit more of a concrete example, the way I like to think about this, I've been an application developer for a long time, and quite likely you have been as well. And my life has been involved around building logic into my applications, building the workflow, orchestrating all the components that might need to be called within that application to achieve a goal. And the goal might be, for example, show me sales data for a particular region. So if you think about that, that's the traditional way in which we go and build an application. We are responsible as developers for kind of building all the logic, orchestrating all the actions that need to happen to achieve a goal. So the difference between that and a large language model is that the large language model is largely responsible for the orchestration of all that part. So with the logic that we might have written inside our application, we're kind of handing over to the large language model, and it's now responsible for orchestrating all those components. And you're kind of going to see how this works. So that's maybe a slightly more concrete way to think about how an agent works. So an agent needs three things. It needs to be able to reason over a business process. And that's, we do that by providing it context or instructions. So the agent says, oh, okay, this is how you want me to behave. I understand that. These are the resources I've got available. And then I'll behave in that way. An agent needs to be able to reach out and grab context from various sources of data. That might be a database, the next example I've got, but it could be documents, it could be a REST endpoint, it could be a whole range of things out there with different bits of data that give it context. So when you're having a conversation with an end user, the agent's going out there and grabbing context as it needs, as it's required. And it needs to be able to perform actions on behalf of perform actions for an end user. It could be something as simple as grabbing data, or it could be maybe that you've created an action there which goes and sends an email. It could be a whole range of things out there. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a quick demo. Now, this is a demo that I built a while back, and it's using a conversational UI framework called Chainlet, which is super cool because it does all this kind of conversational user experience for you. And it means you don't have to go and develop all that yourself. I'm personally not a front-end developer. So things like Chainlet or Streamlit you might have heard of are super useful for building these styles of applications. And you can see that I've signed in, and you can set light mode, dark mode. You've got conversational history over here. It's a super cool framework, and that's what it's been built. You can go click up here for a new chat, and you can obviously put in starter questions in here. So I come along and click on help, and what this will do is that I'm now talking to an agent at the back end. I could say, show me some example questions. And I could even say in Spanish. And you can see what because it's a large language model out there, it will do language translation for you on the fly. So it's super useful when you're going to build an agent for people who speak different languages. Now, you might be wondering, how did this agent know about things like what were the sales by region, or what were the quarters? So how did it know so these might be valid questions? And the reason is I've given it some instructions. If you've played on with chat GPT models, you'll appreciate things like system messages and stuff like that. And that's how it's been set. So basically what I've done is I've given the agent a set of instructions, and they're literally just plain text. And I'll show you some examples of instructions shortly. So what were the sales by region? There's a question I'm going to ask. And what this is going to do is you can see the responses come back. Now, what's happened is that when the application started up, I grabbed the schema of a database that's supporting this application. It's a SQLite database. I grabbed that schema and I gave the large language model the schema of the database. And if you look down here under functions, and this is obviously a developer experience, it's not what you'd give the end user, but you can see what it's done is in here, the large language model has gone off and written a SQL select statement for me. And then what it's done, the agent has passed back to my agent app to say, you need to go and execute the SQL statement. My app goes and executes that SQL statement, grabs the data, and you can see this is the data. And then in the instructions, I've told the agent, I want you to return that data back as a markdown table. Okay, so that's what's going on. So the application, the large language model, is dynamically generating SQL for me on the fly, returning it back to the application. I'm executing that, returning the data back to the large language model. The large language model is formatting that data into the required, sending it back to my agent app, and then I'm presenting that data on the screen. Okay, so that's what's going on. Now, some of you might be thinking, wow, I'm not sure I would ever have an application which would dynamically generate data or dynamically generate SQL on the fly, because that sounds super dangerous. And it would be if you didn't go and do some mitigation. So in these scenarios, you obviously want to do things like locking down your database to be read-only. In the case of the SQL database, I've set it to read-only. In these scenarios here, you do not want someone to try and drop your database or insert data into the database. So those are kind of sensible things you can do. When I point to the documents shortly, you'll be able to see, okay, there's a discussion there around mitigation. Okay, so then I can come along and say, show as a pie chart. Okay, so what's going to happen now is that the large language model has this context, so it knows about the database schema. It saw that as part of the conversation, I said, what were the sales by region? It returned that data. So this context, or this data, is now in the context of what's known as a thread. So that the large language model already knows that. But I've enabled something called the code interpreter. Now, the code interpreter can execute Python code that has been generated by the large language model. So you can come down here and you can see that there goes my pie chart. And in here, you can see used by the code interpreter. Now, this is code that has been generated by the large language model based on the context. And I've set up some instructions that you can go into, that the large language model has access to this thing called the code interpreter, and it's gone and executed this Python code. Now, to be clear, this code interpreter is a sandboxed Python environment, and it's quite limited. It's great for executing things like doing analysis of data, or doing additional analysis data, or creating charts or things like that. But for example, it cannot reach out to the internet and grab additional libraries or grab files or things like that. So it's quite limited in its scope, and obviously for safety reasons. Okay, so we've now got our cute pie chart. You can come along here and say, show in shades of blue. And the large language model will figure, okay, this person here is, maybe they're doing something at corporate, and a corporate environment, they want it nice shades of blue. But you can kind of get the idea what's going on here. The large language model generated some code, and you can see in here, there get some nice shades of blue. So that's kind of how it's working. And then I can come along and say, download the data as an Excel file. Now, what will happen is the large language model will go off and write the appropriate code. And you can see down here in the code that got written by the large language model, you can see it created an XLS file, and my applications grabbed that, and I can open that up, and voila, there goes my data in Excel in the browser. So pretty neat. I can come along and add in some extra context. So what I'm going to do is I would just bring up a PDF file. Should have had this loaded. This is a PDF file that I've got in here. And what it is, it's a data sheet. And it's just some additional information about Contoso Tense. So the database that I'm using that's sitting behind this is kind of transactional. And it doesn't have kind of this rich information here about some additional information about product names. You can see it belongs to a category called camping and hiking. It's got brand information. This brand information, for example, isn't a field in the database. And you can see that there's an expanded description here, the Trail Masters, etc. And you can see that there's a couple of brands in here. I've got one called Alpine Gear, another one called Outdoor Living. So as you kind of get the idea behind this, it's just to provide additional context. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach that Contoso sales, and I'm going to say, what brands of tents do we sell? And I can promise you, before I attach that file, the agent would not be able to answer that question. It would probably come up saying, we don't have that data. So what's happened is that PDF is now being uploaded into the agent, and the agent will vectorize that document and put it into a vector store and make it available for semantic search. Okay, so in a moment, hopefully it will come back and tell me what brand of tents do we sell. We'll give it a moment. And if it doesn't come up, there is a reason for it. And there has been a slight service issue the last day or so, and it looks like it's going to let me down. And we'll give it 5 more seconds, and then we'll give it one. Okay, that's a show. Oh, okay, I must have known I was talking about it. Okay, so then you can see, okay, these are sales. So you can start asking questions about what product types are these brands. And hopefully it won't see the same delay. And we'll see in here the product types. I think that comes up here is their family camping tents. And we could then start saying things like, what were the sales of Alpine Gear? And there's a reasonable chance that we'll make the linkage between Alpine Gear and Alpine Gear. If you remember that PDF, it said it was part of camping and hiking. And so basically it took the information, the context from that PDF document. I asked it what product types it was. It came back and said it was camping and hiking. Then I was able to make that link between the brand and the product type and the data in my database. And you can kind of see. Now, obviously, there's a bit of an assumption here that the only brand of tents that we sell for camping and hiking is from Alpine Gear, which may not necessarily be true. But anyway, you kind of get the idea behind that linkage. So you can kind of see what's going on. Now, this talk is going to be about how did this application work and how can you build this yourself. Now, in that QR code, it points to this workshop. And in this workshop here, it's a 75-minute workshop. You can do it at your self-paced, and this has got all the code in it, all the examples in it, all the instructions that I'm going to be using for this talk. So you, at the end of this talk, you can pop back and figure out how the heck did that work. So just go back to that QR code, or just pop that QR code. If you didn't already take a screenshot of it, grab a screenshot now. Okay. So we've done the use case, we've talked about agents, we've talked about this, we've shown the demo. Okay, so how does the Contoso Sales Assistant work? And it's using a backend service which is currently in preview. And as you can spotted just before, there is one particular service, which is the indexing service, which is slightly playing up at the moment, as of about yesterday, just in time for today's talk. So the agent service, it's in preview at the moment. And the goal behind it is enable you to go and build an agent and to simplify that process of building the agent. So it just deals with a lot of stuff. It deals with the context. It deals with the context window obviously, as the conversation goes with your end user and the agent, that context window will grow. It needs to be trimmed. So the agent service, for example, will reduce the size of that context window as you proceed through the application. Okay, so what it's about is it's going to save you a lot of time, and it really does simplify the process of building applications and making it easy for you to go and build an application. Now, out of the box, it has a lot of data connectors. These are typically ones that you'll find that exist in Microsoft customer environments, well, a whole range of customer environments. But we put in a lot in there to make it really simple for you to go and have your agent reach out to different data sources to be able to add context into that conversation. Now, the models, it supports OpenAI, Meta, and Mistral. And it's a lot of work in there to provide enterprise-grade security. Again, you'll find more information about these in the docs. So if you head off to ai.azure.com. Okay, so that's what the agent service kind of a really high level does for you. Now, the solution architecture. So the application I just showed you before, this is kind of the application solution architecture. I mentioned before, it's using this conversational UI framework called Chainlit. And we're using something called query functions or function calling. And we'll get into that in a moment. But basically, these query functions enable the large language model to be able to reach out to external systems to be able to grab data. And if you've not played around with function calling, and particularly on OpenAI function calling and things like that, my strong recommendation is you do, because agents and how these things work, that's kind of like almost like a core concept behind it. Now, the agent service has a set of instructions, and I'm going to show you instructions in a moment. So fear not if you've not seen these before. And you tell the agent what model you're going to be using. I'm going to be using an OpenAI GPT-4o model. But as I said, you've got models from Mistral and models from Meta that you can also use. And then we have this idea of actions or tools. Function calling, which I mentioned before, is super powerful, enables your application or the large language model to basically enables your large language model to signal back to your agent application that you need to go and do something. In the case of my application, it was to go and grab some data and return that data. You saw the code interpreter working. You saw file search. Remember, I uploaded that PDF document. And in the demo that I'm going to be showing, I'm also going to be using Bing search to grab competitive data. So that's kind of what's going on. Now, how do these agents work? So in the code, you'll see they're basically these six steps going on. In your application, you need to go and create an agent, and you'll see that's a bit of Python code, goes and creates off the agent. And then you have this concept of a thread. Now, a thread is a thread of conversation with the agent and the user. So as the user is asking questions, that prompt or that question is being added to the thread. Then as the conversation continues, context is added to that thread, and that's basically where the context is maintained between the user and the agent as a thread. So each user that you would have within your application would have their own thread. Then what you go and do is you go and run the agent, and then you go, it's an asynchronous operation. Then you basically check, is it done? Is it done? Yep, it's done. And the SDKs do all that for you. So it's pretty transparent. And then when you get the response back from the agent, you'd say, great, I'm going to display that response back to the end user. So as I mentioned before, we go and create the agent. And in this case, we're going to name the agent called Contoso Sales Agent. You give it instructions. You say, you are an advanced sales analysis agent for Contoso, specializing in assisting with users with data sales inquiries. The agent, the instructions I've got that really sit behind it are much, much larger, and I'm going to show you those as we go. You select a model. In this case, I'm using OpenAI GPT. Your data sources, we're going to be using search, and you can see there's a whole lot of tools down here, from the code interpreter, function calling, Bing search, whole range of built-in tools. But clearly you can go and extend these tools with function calling to all the kind of data sources that you want inside that you want to support within your application. Okay, so I mentioned a thread. So remember, a thread is this thread of conversation with a user and the agent. The user comes along and says, tell me the total sales by region. What happens is that then the agent applications basically kicks off this thing called a runner. And in this case, what the runner is going to do, it's going to signal back to the agent app that there's something called a function call, and it tells me the name of the function call. In this case, it's query the data, query the SQLite database. That dynamic bit of SQL gets executed. That was generated by the large language model, and I get back the response back to the end user. So you can see here, the agent's message was, here is the sales for Europe and America. And then just as I showed you before, hey, show me as a pie chart. Same thing would happen. The large language model would go and write the appropriate Python code, send that to the code interpreter. The code interpreter would go and execute that Python code in a sandboxed environment, and then return back the chart. Okay, so that's what's going on. Now, remember I mentioned function calling. I'm going to drill into this a little bit more detail because it's kind of a core concept. So it's basically the capability of a large language model to reach out from the large language model to grab data and get data back, basically return data back in structured format. So the example here that we've got, excuse me, I'm just going to blow my nose. You're a sales agent. So the instructions are, you're a sales agent. You get all your sales data from the app using the functions provided, user database, schema, and this metadata when writing SQL. So remember when I said the application started up, the thing that I do is I go and interrogate the database and grab the schema and add that into that prompt, so it knows how to get the so the large language model knows how to go and write the appropriate SQL. And you can see in here in the Python code, and you'll see within that workshop that I pointed you at, there is in the Python code a method called async fetch sales data using SQLite query. And you've got what's called a function definition sitting in here. The function is used to answer questions, etc. So it's just telling a bit to the large language model what to look out for. And if you see this scenario, then we'll create the SQL and return it to the agent. The agent says, okay, I need to go and call that method in my application called async fetch sales data. Go and execute that. The user types in what were the sales for April. Large language model generates that bit of SQL and then returns the data. Okay, so that's what's going on. So the first demo that I'm going to show. Now, let me just double check if there are any questions. Okay. Thank you. Someone said Dave is the best. Okay, cool. So if you've got questions, now I'm out of presentation mode. The rest of this talk is mostly going to be demo. So I will keep an eye on the questions. So do feel free to ask questions. And if I can deal with that at the same time, I will. So as I mentioned before, you remember, come back in the browser. We've got this workshop in here. I'm going to be going through these steps in these labs. And that's what I'm going to be demoing. So we'll go back to Visual Studio Code, and I've already opened up this the project. And what I'm going to do is I'm in main.py, and I've got a set of instructions. Now, you remember the instructions I mentioned before. So we're going to uncomment this thing, what's called adding to the tool. But the main thing I'm going to do is come down to instructions, and we're going to open up the instructions that I uncommented up here. So I commented this one here called function calling. And down here in the instructions folder, you'll see this set of instructions. Alrighty, so remember I said instructions tell the large language model how it's to behave. It's kind of giving it its personality, if you want, its persona. So we'll say in here, your role is the assistant for Contoso users. You tell the Contoso, well, you're an online retail, online camping, outdoor retail. You'll say in here, ensure all responses strictly use data provided, never go off and create random data. And then I give it some tools. So remember in that slide with the agent, I talked about there were some tools, some built-in tools. This is the tool that I'm going to define for function calling. And basically says this is a tool called Sales Data Assistance. And it says the Contoso sales database is defined by a schema. Now, when the application starts up, grab the schema, and I'm basically doing a replace of that placeholder and the application. So when these instructions are passed to the large language model, it'll have the schema in there. It'll say all queries are to use this thing called fetch sales data using SQL query. Okay, so remember that's that bit of function that's a function that I have inside my agent. And then you tell it things like provide aggregate by default. Never return back more than 30 rows. You do not want the end user now suddenly having millions of rows of data coming back into the agent. So you kind of put some limits in there. Never generate a query that returns all rows. That seems reasonable. If the user asks for more than 30 rows, say refusal or partial compliance, up to 30 rows. Always translate the response to the used or requested or inferred language. Always respond with markdown tables by default. You saw in that application I showed before, it was in markdown tables. If the user asks to download data, then download in CSV format. And then you put in some content guidelines. Do not generate content. So hopefully you kind of get the idea. There's some query guidance. You remember in that demo, in my first demo, you might have been wondering, well, how did the agent know to give various examples? It's because in the instructions, I kind of gave it some examples to get started on. Now, of course, the large language model has been given the schema. It's given some example questions, so it can look at the schema, look at some examples, and kind of expand on that set as well. And then you can have things like code of conduct or conduct guidelines, and it might be say, okay, what do you deal if the user's kind of getting a bit hostile? It might say if the user appears to be upset or hostile, respond. I'm here to help with sales data inquiries. Please contact support. If they're getting really not getting the response. If the query is unclear, if the question is unclear, then prompt for either prompt for additional information or ask them to contact IT. Okay, so that's what's going on with the function, so instructions. So hopefully it's clear what's going on. You've got this large language model, which kind of understands lots. You're basically tailoring down the behavior of the large language model now to respond like Contoso sales, all that kind of thing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is hit F5 to run the application. Now you remember I told you it was going to create this agent. So it's created an agent object, and now it's created a thread. And they've got IDs and things like that. And I can now come along here and say, show sales by region. You hopefully can see that down the bottom of my screen. I'll make my screen a little bit bigger. And hopefully you can see that. So show sales by region. So what that's going to do is the large language model has got the schema, and it's generated the SQL command. You can see that's a SQL command that's been generated by the large language model. It's been sent back to my application, the agent app, and now you can see it streamed back that information. Okay, great. So I've got revenue, total orders, and perfect. And then I can say things like show for 2000 and I could ask for what years do you report on? And I know this database only has between 2022 and 2024. So I could say show for 2022. And what that will do now is that you'll see it'll generate a SQL query, and you'll see that there's a where statement in there now. Scroll back up there. You'll see there's a where statement in there. So the large language model's figured, okay, part of this conversation, they've just asked me about sales. Then they asked me about what time and what reporting years, and then it's come back 22. And then I could say things like just for April. And the large language model will figure, oh, well, I know there's a month column in there. And we'll say the month is 4. And you can say, hey, look, now I've got my data just back for that period. So hopefully that makes sense with what's going on. Right, the next part I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about something called grounding with documents. And there's a whole stack of information you'll find in here about how this works. But we're going to pop back to the demo, and I'm going to uncomment the next set of instructions. And down through here, I'm going to uncomment a little bit of code, which is responsible for uploading a PDF document, creating a vector store, and adding that PDF to the vector store. And as you can see, there's not too much code. Now, in fairness, there is a little bit of utility code that's sitting behind there. Now, we'll go into the file search instructions, and we'll just scroll, make this a little bigger. So remember, the instructions define the behavior. So I showed you the tools before. So we had the sales data assistance. And now what I'm doing is I've added in an additional tool. And in fact, I've added in one too many tools. We're going to get rid of that. And the additional tool is in here is just search, and it's a Contoso product information vector store. So basically, I'm telling the agent that you now have a vector store that you can now start asking questions against. So we'll go back to the main.py, and we'll go hit F5 to run this. Now you'll see what the application's doing. It's uploading a PDF to the agent service. It's creating this vector store, and it added that application, or added that PDF, I should say, to the vector store. Now I can come along and start asking different questions. Now, remember I showed you before the datasheet. So this is a data sheet. Remember I showed you the data sheet before? We had product names in here, Trail Master, category, camping and hiking, and we've got brand in here. So I can promise you that the database, which is more of an operational sales database, does not have the concept of brand in that database. So I can start asking, what brand of tents do we sell? Now, what this will do is this will interrogate the vector store and grab that data. So you can see it's now got outdoor living and alpine gear. And if I scroll down through my PDF, you can see up here, I've got outdoor living, and we'll scroll down here and we've got another one called alpine gear. Now, they belong to a product type. So we'll come up here and you'll see product type for both of them. So I could come along here and say, what product type are these brands? And we'll now see that what's going to happen, it's grab the product type. So you can see in here, we've got family camping tents, family camping tents. Great. So I now know that. So an end user, now the way this application, there are two ways in which you can attach kind of additional context in this way. As an end user, as I showed in the first demo, I could add documents if this is what you wanted. I could add documents kind of as the conversation's flowing. Or you might decide, do you know what? I've got a whole stack of PDFs or Word documents or Excel, or there's a whole stack of different files you can add in. When the application starts, I'm going to vectorize all those documents when the agent starts and make them available to all users. So it just kind of depends on your scenario. Okay, so we've now got that question, which now I could come along and say, what were the sales for these brands? And now the way it's going to link this is because I know product type, because now in that I've asked for that product type, you'll see we've got family camping tents. We'll just say just for family camping. You got yourself a little bit confused there. And hopefully that will be enough for me just to nudge it along to generate the data. Okay, cool. So there goes the set. So the value is the really cool thing about this is that you can start adding context into this agent from lots of different sources. I've shown you from the database, and now I'm showing you from the PDF. Alrighty, so the next demo I'm going to show is we're going to go across the docs and we're going to use the code interpreter. So I showed you the code interpreter before in operation, but we're going to go back to the lab, and we're now going to look at the code interpreter. And we've enabled the code interpreter, and down through the code here, we're just going to enable a couple of lines to add the code interpreter to the agent. And we're going to look at the instructions for the code interpreter. And you'll see in here, I might just reduce the font size a little bit because it just gets a little bit unwieldy. So remember, defines a behavior. I've got tools. Remember, I had the sales data. That's grabbing the data out of SQLite. I've got the PDF data store. And now I've added another tool, which is the code interpreter. So, and I give it some rules. I tell it how to behave. So for example, I want it to use, I want it to display, so write the code, and if errors occurred, just behind the scenes, go and retry it. Always use charts and graphs to illustrate trending format. Always create visualizations as files in .png format. Okay, so we're going to go back to main and we're going to execute this. F5, so we've now got 3 tools in this application of this agent. So I've got the function calling, I've got the vector store, and now I've got the code interpreter. So what I can do now is show sales by region. Okay, so it goes and does this, and while that's executing that, okay, so you've seen that it's come back, and I could say, well, actually, do you know what? I just want the revenue. Just want the revenue. And that's great. So what it's going to do is it's going to just return back the revenue. And I might say, show as a pie chart. And what they will do now is that the large language model has the that table with just revenue in it. And it's going to write the appropriate Python code. That Python code is executed in the code interpreter. When that's complete, the agent server signals back to my application to say, there's a file waiting for you. And then the agent grabs that file from the code interpreter storage. And there goes my pie chart with my labels. Right, so the next thing I want to do, and I can come along here and say show as a bar chart, for example. And that's all good. And that will go off and call the code interpreter and do that, and make that work. Now, I'm going to show an additional example, which is a bit of a gotcha. And you'll see in here, now I might say show the sales, I might say show all data in Spanish. Now, I don't speak Spanish, but I'll probably be able to muddle my way through. Okay, so we've now got the data back in Spanish. Actually, this is not a good example. I'm going to say show the data in Japanese. Now, there is a reason for this. Is Japanese don't use Latin characters. So that's great. You can see that, and that's fine because this agent here is rendering back to VS Code, and the terminal can render off the Japanese characters. But let's say I say now show as a pie chart. And what happens is that the code interpreter goes and runs that code and generates that pie chart for me, returns that back because my PNG file. And now you'll notice that this pie chart doesn't have the labels in Japanese. And you might be thinking, well, why not? Because I saw this text up here is all in Japanese. And the issue is that the code interpreter only has Latin fonts in it. And obviously for lots of languages around the world, you think, well, there are lots, I need to be able to deal with other fonts. So cunningly enough, we've got another lab in here for dealing with multilingual. And how do you deal with that? So we're going to pop back to the demo. stop this bit of code. And we'll just close some of this stuff down. And what I'm going to do is we're going to add in multilingual, and I'll show you what's going on in a moment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload a font set to the code interpreter. And we're going to look at the instructions for code interpreter. And down through here, you'll see there are now some extended instructions. And basically what I'm going to do is the application is going to upload some fonts, and then I'm telling the code interpreter for non-Latin scripts like Arabic, Korean, Hindi, always include code to test if there's a font, if there's a folder called fonts. If there isn't, then unzip the fonts that I've uploaded. And then I come along here and I say, look, the available fonts, because you need to kind of give the large language model a fighting chance. You tell it, well, these are the fonts that I've got. I've got Arabic, Hindi, Japanese, etc. Font usage, load the fonts with Matlib. And you need to prompt the large language model to be a little bit smarter about how you're going to deal with fonts. So that's what this is about. And there's a bit of information there. So, okay. So that's what's here. We'll go and run F5 to go and run this. And what you'll see is we've uploaded the PDF document before, created the vector store for that PDF. Great. And now you'll see I'm uploading some fonts. Great. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say, show me the sales by region. Arabic is in there too. Yeah, cool. So I went and added kind of most of the languages. Now, you might be wondering why I didn't add Chinese in that list, by the way. Chinese font set's quite large, and it was 10 megabytes. It was just too large in terms of doing the demo, so I kind of reduced the set. Okay, so there we go. We've got show that. Okay, well now we'll say show, someone said they were keen on Arabic, show in Arabic. And probably should have done one step before that, but anyway, fingers crossed this will work. Now, what that will do is it passes that context, and what I'm hoping it will do is should auto-translate that into Arabic. So code interpreter ran, and you remember I uploaded some font sets, and voila, I've now got my charts in Arabic. And remember I said, okay, show in Japanese. And you'll see that the code interpreter run. Remember I had Japanese font loaded in that font set. You'll see in the examples, you'll see that over here, I've got fonts.zip. That's where that is. It's not time to lose my voice. We'll come back over here and, oh, it didn't work entirely. Show all labels in Japanese. Oh, not helped by not spelling correctly, but that should be okay. Sometimes you still need to give it a bit of a nudge. And hopefully that was enough nudge. It wasn't enough nudge. Okay, the joys of doing a demo. Not that it didn't work, but we're going to move on. Right, the last bit, the last thing I'm going to talk about is another lab in here, which is called grounding with Bing Search. And you remember, we've got lots of tools. We've got the file function calling. We've got file search. We've got the code interpreter. I'm going to add another one, which is called grounding with Bing. Now, out of the box, we have provided the support to make this work super easy. Now, you might say, well, I want to go and use Google. I might want to go and use another search engine or whatever it is back in. And there's nothing to stop you doing that. We just happen to provide it out of the box support for Bing, which is not too surprising because it's Microsoft. I guess we wanted people to use Bing. Okay, so we enable Bing support within the agent. And we come down here and look in the instructions. Remember, I uncommented this Bing grounding, and we'll come down to Bing grounding. We'll look at the instructions for this. So I've got these tools, and I've added in another tool down here, which is called Competitive Insights for Product Categories. And it says, use the grounding for Bing search tool to gather competitive product names, company names, prices, and short descriptions. Never ask questions that are not related to outdoor camping and sports. So you're basically telling the large language model, you've got this tool, but it's not a free-for-all. You cannot go and start searching Bing for things to do on my holidays. Well, maybe you can if it's related to camping gear. Never return more than three results. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to run this. And we're going to come along here. You see that the PDF with that data sheet's been added in. We're adding some fonts. And we're enabling Bing search. And we'll make the font just a little bit bigger. You need the Arabic reshaper. I'm sure I do. There goes a challenge for you. So we're going to add in, so we've now got my up and running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, what brand of tents do we sell for beginners? All right, I'm not sure that's spelled correctly. Anyway, get there. So what brand of tents do we, okay, so remember, let's grab that out of the PDF. Great. And now I'm going to start asking a question of what tents do our competitors sell for beginners and at what price? Right, okay, so now it's reaching out to Bing, and Bing is going to return back this data. And if you go out and if you went into Bing and start asking questions, you would see that would do that. I think this is actually picked up US by default. I'm based in Australia. I could say for Australia. And Bing search will obviously go back and grab that data and show Australian brands. Perfect. And you can see it's here, it's showing me the price. And there is a reason I wanted to show the price. I could now come back and say, what tents do we sell at a similar price point? Okay, so the large language model can see within the context that the price range points were between 100 and 150. If I scroll back up here, I'm sure we'll see 120, 100, and there goes 150. Great, so we now know the price range, and this was a select statement that was generated. And you can see that's between 100 and 150 was the price range. Region was knew that was in Australia. And it can see the price range is approximately, for the backpacking tents, priced at approximately $111, Australian dollars with an 11% discount. Okay, so that's the kind of the power of these tools to be able to reach out and add richness to the conversation. I could say, of course, show as a table. And I'm not quite sure how it's going to format this up. Perfect. It's done it like that. And then, of course, include, maybe I could say include US pricing. We'll see what that does for North America. There's no tents in that price range. Okay, never mind. That'll teach me for going off piste. Okay, so right, just looking at the questions. That's pretty much the demo. I'm going to jump back over here to the tool. So these are the demos. So this is the link to that workshop that I just showed you. So as I said before, if you didn't grab a screenshot before, screenshot it now. Okay, hope you've done that. We'll pop back to the workshop. There goes the workshop. Work your way through this. Before you'll need, at the end of it, make sure you go and wrap up. This will take you through the process. You'll also find a link to the repo in there. Be sure to star it, just so for one thing, you can find your way back to it. And just clean up various resources, and it's kind of got how to clean up all the resources from code spaces to Azure resources. Okay, I'm just going to look through the question from Aaron. How does it know which tool to execute since, okay, So I'm just looking at that question there. The large language, if I come back over here and you look at the flow of the conversation, you will see that if I come back to I'll go to the Bing search because it's really much more obvious in the Bing search one. I'll just make this a bit larger. The Bing search one here, it was really obvious. I framed my question like I was asking for competitive information. And in here, you'll see, well, I've told the large language model that you can use the grounding with Bing search for competitive search, for finding prices and things like that. It knew to use the assistance here because I was asking questions about sales data, and I'd passed it in the schema. And I was asking questions about, tell me a bit about the data. So the large language model knows, okay, that's a tool, that's a schema. I'm going to reach out, I'm going to generate the SQL. And so it kind of knows, it's inferred knowledge. Down here, I was quite explicit. I told it this was the name of the vector store. So when I started asking information that wasn't information that you could find directly within the database, because there was no concept of brand, it knows to go and look in the vector store. And if I pop back to main.py, I'm pretty sure that the vector store name up here, that's the name of the vector store. So that's the linkage. So so in the instructions, you need to make sure that there is a linkage back to the tool that you want to go and use. So that's kind of how it's working. Hopefully and you'll have to play around with it, but you'll kind of see. And the biggest challenge I've had writing this app, the code, as you can see, there isn't actually that much code. If I go into main.py, there's what, 215 lines on there. There's a utility class, which is maybe got, if I go and look in utility, there's hundreds. So this application's only got around about 300, maybe there's an event handler in here, which is, okay, it's got 350 lines of code in it. So there's actually not much lines of code in it. You'll find that the biggest skill and the things you need to think about is you need to think about the context or the instructions or the prompt engineering skills. And then you will invariably need to go and build your own custom tools. So I've built a custom tool, the custom tool was to grab the data out of a SQLite, but you will need to go and build your custom tools. You might have data sitting in, I don't know, in a CSV file or a whole range of different places, and you'll need to go and write some custom tooling to tell. So when the large language model says, hey, look, I want that data, you'll signal back to the agent, and then you'll know to call your custom tool to go and grab the data from where you need to go and grab that data. So that's kind of how we have 100 agents running. Does this approach feasible? I can't answer your use case, Aaron, but where I found this, there are places where I really have left the large language model to get on and do its thing. But if you have lots of different, more specific requirements, then I would probably be inclined in the instructions to be more specific about what you want it to kind of do. I'm not sure that's 100% clear about doing it, but there is a point where you would say, look, large language model, I don't want you to go and generate me SQL, dynamic SQL. I want you to go and execute this specific SQL for this specific question, because it might just say that it doesn't make sense for all scenarios to go and grab the data using dynamic. So things like that. I can't answer your question. You're just going to have to try and look at this and figure out where and how it scales. I'm so short how it works. I have a question. Can we provide the agent with few shot? Yes, you could absolutely do that. And I'm sort of doing that. So the question is, can I give it some few shot examples? I'm sort of doing that few shot examples down here. And query guidance. I know it's not entirely few shot. These are few shot examples. So this is an example here of some few shot examples. So yes, you can, and you would. And in many respects, now I will show you something just so you know a bit more what's going on. If I come back over to, I'm going to set a breakpoint. And so, and I'm going to stop in a moment or two because I'm running out of time. Now, you remember down through here, I'm just going to rerun this code, and I've set a breakpoint for the data schema. And I'm going to show you what's going to happen. What I do is that I not only grab the schema, but I grab kind of like some few shot examples dynamically. And what I'm doing is I'm doing some distinct. So I'm doing distinct on product type, product category, regions, and reporting years. So if I go and look at my schema string, this is what's sitting in here. And you can see I've got my table schema. So you can see I've got column ID, integer, main category, text, etc. Now, if I scroll down through here a little bit, I know there's a lot. You can see I've got product types. And what I'm doing is I'm telling the large language model to say, do you know what? I'm going to give you a bit of a start of a 10, and here goes some product types. And then if I scroll down a little bit further down through here, you'll see that I've got product categories. And then you'll see down here, I've got reporting years. So what I've done is I've kind of given the large language model some hints or some kind of few shot examples, if you want, to say, look, these are the reporting years, these are the categories. So rather than, this just helps the process of the large language model figuring out what the end user is asking the agent. So you kind of helping the agent with some additional context, or kind of like a few shot examples. Okay, data sets, data security. Can we encrypt secure data? Yeah, look, you could do whatever you want. So the question was there around data security. Yes, you could. You could have a function which generates that data, and then you go and encrypt it. And of course, remember, and you could go and encrypt that data, and then in your agent app, you could decrypt it. Yes, you can. When displaying, yes, you could do that. And yeah, you do that with a custom tool. Let me just look back through here. Interesting. I don't actually know if. Okay. Pamela's answering that question. Alrighty. Okay. Cool. Alrighty. So that's the talk. Those are resources. Super happy for you to connect with me on LinkedIn. So feel free to grab a screenshot of that and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much for taking your time to enjoy this, and enjoy the rest of the hack and get hacking and build agents. This service is super cool. So get going. Great. Thank you very much. I think there's a wrap up.
Hi, everyone. Hope you enjoyed today's session. If you aren't registered for the AI Agents Hackathon yet, register now at aka.ms/agentshack and start hacking on the agent of your dreams.
And if you have any questions along the way, just post in our GitHub discussion forum or attend our live office hours in Discord. And of course, make sure that you keep attending the live streams to keep learning about agents.
Once your project is ready, submit it before April 30th at 11:59 p.m. PT to be eligible for our prizes. Thanks for joining.
Thank you all for joining, and thank you to our speakers. This session is a part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. We'll see you at the next one.